Good afternoon. I'm Juliane Camfield. I'm the director of Deutsches Haus at NYU. It is my great pleasure on behalf of Deutsches Haus at NYU and the Consulate General of Germany in New York and the Consulate General of Germany in LA to welcome you to our conversation with Academy Award-winning director Caroline Link in the context of the May 21st release by Greenwich Entertainment of When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, her adaptation of acclaimed British author Judith Kerr's classic novel that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. For those of you who are not, just a very brief, super brief synopsis. Based on Judith Kerr's childhood memories, the novel and the film tell the story of a Jewish family's escape from 1933 Berlin to Switzerland, France, and ultimately England, and tackle prejudice, exile, displacement, and adaptation as told from the perspective of the author's alter ego, 9-year-old Anna Kemper. Welcoming remarks for the event will be provided by Dirk Schulz, the Deputy Consul General of the German Consulate General in New York. No, sorry, Los Angeles. Too many cooks involved in this pie. Thank you, of course, to Dirk Schulz from the General German Consulate. I'm really messing this up. From the Consulate General of Germany, Los Angeles. And a big thanks also to Yasemin Pamuk from the Consulate General of Germany, New York, and to her colleague Brittany Wenzel, to Sophie Gluck, to Greenwich Entertainment, to Nicole Kaufmann from German Films, to my Deutsches Haus colleagues, Sarah, Linda, Adriana, and Christian, and of course, to our audience. Before I hand things over to Dirk Schulz, I want to briefly tell you a little bit more about Caroline Link. My colleague will put the detailed information about her biographical information in the chat. You will see all the awards she has won and the titles of all the movies she has made. So here comes a very, very condensed bio info. One of Germany's most respected directors, Caroline Link, studied at the Munich Academy of Film and Television. Her third feature, Nowhere in Africa, about a German Jewish refugee family adjusting to farm life in 1930s Kenya, received the 2001 Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, making her the second female director to win the award. Her feature debut, Beyond Silence, the portrayal of a family with deaf parents, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Her other films include Anna Luisa and Anton, A Year Ago in Winter, All About Me, and of course, most recently, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. And now it is my pleasure to hand things over to Dirk Schulz, and I'm tremendously sorry that I messed up the name of the consulate so badly, but it's a pleasure to have you. Take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juliane. I hope everybody can understand here from the West Coast. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address you on the occasion of this conference. First of all, it is my pleasure and great honor to thank Caroline Link for her participation. I can say I'm a long-time admirer of your work, not only for the Oscar you received, but also for your other works, which I followed for many years in German cinemas and in German television. Another great thank you I say to Juliane and the fantastic staff of German House in New York, who made this event possible. Juliane will lead through the conference after my brief remarks. And of course, I welcome the audience. It is great that you joined in, especially in times of growing Zoom fatigue. If a teenager asked me which two books I recommend to learn about, to learn more about the circumstances in which Jewish people were forced to live in by the National Socialists, I would pick, first of all, Diary of Anne Frank. No other book can touch you more. It's a unique historic monument. Anne Frank describes persecution and anxiety in a total, authentic manner, and it leads to a deadly consequence. For younger children, the second good option might be easier to bear. When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr is a book about exile. The family is forced to leave their home and their country. They have to leave friends and personal belongings behind to save their lives. With their own memories as a real background, Judith Kerr shows the readers what it meant and what it still means for people to be persecuted, how they struggle in exile. The book, as well as the movie, do not focus too much on political circumstances, but on people's feelings, fears, hopes, and their relationships. Anne Frank and Judith Kerr as well underline the importance of family ties. These ties help both young girls to sustain the very difficult situations in which they had to live. Judith Kerr's book is a very readable story. This helped a lot to attract large numbers of readers over the years, in particular in schools all over the world. For all these reasons, it was overdue that a prestigious director took the book to transform it into a movie. Caroline Link is this director, and the result is, of course, fantastic. When I arrived some months ago in Los Angeles, people warned me. It is very difficult for foreign films to find its audiences here in LA. People are used to high quality filmmaking with multi-million-dollar budgets, great actors, outstanding directors, tricky shots of breathtaking landscapes, heartbreaking stories, and big buckets of popcorn. Well, if you're looking for this, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is the real deal. You will find it all in the movie. In particular, the young girl in the role of the main character will impress you. I can assure you, she's great. You will laugh a little, you will cry a little. So please take your kids to the next open nearby movie theater where it will be screened and enjoy. Having said this, I give back the floor to Juliane to start the conversation with Caroline Link. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Bye from LA.
Thank you so much, Dirk, for this wonderful introduction. And it is now my pleasure to welcome Caroline Link. Caroline, please join us and start the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and, of course, for making this really powerful film. I watched it with my family recently, and it worked both for the older and younger members of our household. So thanks for making time in your busy schedule to join us today. And let me start with the first question. Your film is, of course, based, as we all know, on the acclaimed novel by Judith Kerr. You've also made other films that were literary adaptations, including Nowhere in Africa, Anna Luisa and Anton, and All About Me. What, in general, would you say are the main challenges and opportunities of writing a screenplay and then making a film based on an existing literary work? And specifically regarding When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, how did you decide what to add, what to change, and what to leave out? I know that's a big question, but perhaps you can share a bit of light on it. And what was it like to collaborate with Judith Kerr? I understand you spoke with her.
So many questions. So many
sorry.
questions.
Okay, I'll let you
answer one after the other.
Yes, yes.
That would be much easier. Otherwise, I forget the beginning of my answer, maybe. You asked, what is the challenge of making a movie after a novel, especially after a famous novel that many people have an opinion about and know so well. So you have to make choices and you have to stand the fact that maybe not everybody agrees with you on the choices you make. But I think the most important thing is that you capture the spirit of a novel, that you capture the tone, that you when I started to work on When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, I tried to remember what I loved so much about that story when I was a young girl. I read it, I think, when I was 11 years old, and I remember that I was very grateful to Judith Kerr that I didn't have to be afraid of that book, because it was serious, it was very moving, and it didn't play the darkness of the time down, and at the same time it was optimistic and light in a way that was surprising for that subject matter. So I thought, okay, when I make a movie after this novel, I don't want to add anything that is more dramatic, maybe, or some, producers asked me to make it a little bit more suspenseful or to add some outside plot. And I thought, no, I think that is not the solution. I think Judith Kerr managed so well to make this a very intense, to write a very intense and emotional book without loud plots, loud, exciting things happening. It's all very internal. And I would like to make a movie that is, directed in the tone that she has written the book. So I always think it's about atmosphere. It's about details. I think the details in Judith Kerr's book are very strong. The moments, the language. And so I try to get as much Judith Kerr into my movie as possible.
Mm-hmm. Like one thing, for example, that I think you added was the whole story with the calendar that Anna keeps, right? This daily calendar where she counts the day until she thinks she will be able to return to Berlin, which at some point she realizes that is not so likely, and gives it up eventually. And one thing you left out, I think, is the story with the grandmother visiting the family in Switzerland, and the whole story with the dog. And I was just really curious, like, how did you decide on adding the calendar story and leaving out the grandmother and the dog story?
I mean, in real life, Judith Kerr had a pretty wealthy family in, I think, southern France. And I thought for our story, it is not helpful to add more characters, because too many characters, every character needs screen time. Every character needs to be three-dimensional and needs good scenes. Otherwise, they don't make sense. And if I try to put everything that's in the novel into a 2 hours movie, it's going to become superficial. You just try to how do you say, tick all the scenes that are in the book, and then at the end of the day, the movie is not intense. I always think it's better to stop for a moment at a scene and then go into the deepness of the scene or the depth of the feeling, and not to add too many ingredients and just look at them briefly and superficially. So I thought, maybe we can put some characters, blend them together. So some people they meet in the different countries, the family, I turned into one person, or I tried to put scenes together. And in other moments, I tried to emphasize the
Oh, Carolina is back.
I'm so
Carolina,
sorry.
welcome back. Welcome back.
We had a really strong thunderstorm here and lightning. Maybe that was the reason. I don't know. I'm so sorry.
Oh, don't worry at all. I just told everybody where your film is playing in New York and Los Angeles, and talked about the wonderful way you work with children, and recommended that everybody go back and watch your earlier work. I especially talked about All About Me, and how wonderful you worked with the actor in that movie. And so that's what we've been doing, and I'm so glad to see you again. These moments are so nerve-wracking, because you don't know, have you lost somebody forever, or is it just a temporary glitch? But I'm glad it was just temporary. And now I've sort of forgotten where we left, but perhaps I'll just move on to my next question, which is also about family constellations, since you were talking, and now I remember you were talking about how you decide to condense characters to make them sort of into one or two figures, rather than bringing in multiple characters on the periphery, to really stick to the spirit of the script or a story.
And the scene that you mentioned with the calendar, I think that seemed to be to me an invention that was helpful to bring out what Judith Kerr, I think, tried or did so well in her novel, and that is to to show the red thread that goes through the whole story, and that is, like you said, you know, what makes the story so emotional. And I think this is for a long time the hope of that family, to be able to go back home one day, and that this journey might only be a short journey. And at the end of the movie, Anna has to understand that there will be no going back home anymore. And so I think by creating this calendar where she crosses the days until they go back home, until she throws the calendar away because she realizes, you know what, I will never go back home. I think that is a very small invention, but I think it is very emotional, because we understand with her that she gives up to look into the past, and that she decides to look into the future and says, whatever might come, I will have to look in the future. There is no going back home. And so I always try with when you ask me, what do I do when I take a literature and adapt it? I think I always try to capture the spirit and the emotionality and the tone of the writer who wrote the novel.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great segue to my next question. In the novel, Judith Kerr's narrator asks about Anna's experiences in exile, and I'll quote from the novel: could her life, since she had left Germany, really be described as a difficult childhood? Some things had been difficult, but it had always been interesting and often funny. And she and Max and Mama and Papa had nearly always been together. As long as they were together, she could never have a difficult childhood. End of quote. And very provocatively asked, can a Holocaust story have a relatively, and really in quotes, happy outcome? And how can artists, and in this case, writers and filmmakers, make the Holocaust and its horrors and atrocities accessible for younger audiences? These are two questions that the novel as well as your film negotiate, I think, quite well, with the help of focusing on the children's perspective. But you also bring in the adult perspective, and you've taken certain liberties of adding that complication of the children's perspective. And I think questions of empathy and identification are really important when thinking about these ideas. But of course, I want to hear what you think about this provocative question, how you addressed it in your work and in your thought process preceding the realization.
I don't think that was my decision, because I think that was Judith Kerr's decision already in the book. The book is, and that is, I think, what makes it so wonderful. It is not, as I said before, I think it is not playing the situation down. It is it takes the situation, the journey of the family, the forced journey, very serious. It is a very sad story. And at the same time, complicated and complex as life is sometimes, it is an adventurous time. And Judith Kerr told me on the telephone when I talked to her, you know what, Caroline, for my brother and me, I might say that these years were the most beautiful years of my life. And I always thought, oh, Judith, this is something very difficult to say. How can I, as a German filmmaker, repeat this and say, okay, the Nazis made you leave your home country, and you say it's the most beautiful time of your life? And she would always say, but that's the way it was. I would lie if I told you something else, because even if we were poor, we were as a family together. And for me as a child, that was the magic thing. I think Alfred Kerr, the father of Judith Kerr, managed really well to show his children the positive side of the coin, you know, the positive opportunities, the richness in meeting new people, seeing new countries, speaking different languages. And even though the challenges were existential and difficult for the parents, I think for the two children, it felt very intense, because the family stayed together, but only if the family stayed together, not if the parents left before the kids or traveled into another country. But Judith Kerr said that a few times to me, and even her children repeated that she always remembers that time as a very rich and adventurous and even optimistic, positive time in her life.
Mm-hmm. I think at one point in your film, your character Anna says, wenn man kein Zuhause hat, muss man immer zusammenbleiben. Like if you don't have a home, and perhaps any longer, you always have to stick together, which of course brings up the question of Heimat and belonging, which is such a, like a powerful term, and so much at the core also of this story of this family that is forced into exile and has to move, and the children have to start understanding like new contexts that they know nothing about, and have to navigate these new worlds. And of course, that is a historical topic, but of course, it's still relevant today, right? We look at the news, we read about refugees, we read about displaced people. We know millions of people currently are not in their original homeland because they were forced out by wars or environmental crises. And I think a film like yours sensitizes, especially a younger audience, for these challenges that children and family face. And I'm just curious if you could share with us the audience responses you've experienced in that regard, in terms of the relevance of making the connection for audiences between what happened in the past and what's going on today.
Yeah, we showed the movie a lot to younger people in Germany, to teenagers and children in schools. And actually, I really talked with many more children about the situation of refugees than we talked about anti-Semitism. Right now, the situation might already be different, since the fighting in Israel at the moment, and anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic statements, demonstrations, and violence in Germany would be a strong subject matter at the moment. But when I had the movie in German movie theaters, that was not so much the case. And we talked a lot more about the daily situation of refugees. And I think what makes the story strong for children is that they can easily identify themselves with Anna, because Anna is a girl, like a child like they are. It's like an everyday, a girl from next door. She is so much a German little girl with 9 years in the story, and there is nothing about her that could make it understandable why anybody would have anything against her. So the injustice of the situation at that time, I think, is very clear to the young audience when they see the movie, and they say, imagine the situation that you have to pack your suitcase from one day to the other without even knowing what happened and what you did wrong, and then you're never allowed to return, and you're never allowed to go back. So we talked a lot about the feelings and how important that is, to be open to people who come and seek for shelter, and to and talk about tolerance, and that religion cannot be a reason why somebody would not be allowed to stay. But it's a very complicated world, and the children today ask complicated questions because they realize how difficult the situation is. And even in Germany at the moment, we have the situation that we have many refugees coming from Muslim countries, and we have German Jews who are sometimes, unfortunately, afraid of the Muslim refugees who are coming to our country. So if you talk about anti-Semitism, about refugees, about the political situation in Germany and in the world, it is all very complex. And there have been many, many discussions after seeing that movie in different subject matters. Yeah.
I was also thinking, like, for parents, like these days, and of course it's a very different situation, but like given the pandemic, you as parents, you ask yourself, or you have been asking yourself, or at least many parents I know, including myself, you've asked yourself, like, what do I share with my children? Like what kind of a picture do I paint of this threat, of the people who are dying, the people who are sick, the danger of getting infected, and of course it is a different situation because it's sort of an invisible enemy, right? Whereas the Nazis were very visible, but at the same time you negotiate was kannst du deinem Kind zumuten, right? Like how much, what kind of a burden?
Unstable world. Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
dangerous, unstable world. It makes you insecure because you don't really know where the danger is coming from. To me, it was always very important that in the story, even though most of the time they are sitting on rich tables, they have enough food, they have, you know, really an halfway pleasant life, that family in my movie, that in certain moments, like for example in Switzerland, when Anna listens to what the two men say when they go for a walk over the meadows, you know, that for some moments a window into the very dark, black, horrifying reality in Germany at that time is opened. Like when the two men talk about what happens to Mr. Teitelbaum, the professor at the university, who is kept in a cage like a dog and beaten up by the Nazis, that for a moment, this 9-year-old girl hears something that she's not supposed to hear. And for a moment, we sense that there is a black darkness, a threatening black darkness in Germany, and that she is just a step away from that. And that was supposed to underline, you know, and to lay underneath the harmless, sunny, beautiful nature present of that family. It always accompanies them through their journey, that there is in Germany something horrible going on. And so that was important to me, that it's always there, like a dark cloud somewhere on the sky.
I think that was a brilliant tool also with the postcards from Uncle Julius, right? That bring in the reality in encoded ways, but then the parents choose to translate the code, so to speak. And then, of course, later on, we learn through Herr Rosenfeld about Julius's death. And so I think the way Judith Kerr and you then use that device of the quote unquote messenger report, the postcard, the outside voice that comes into the story, I feel it's very effective because it protects the children's perspective, but at the same time, as you said, it opens up the historic background and underlying threat.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful, not only to protect the children, but you have to be careful what you repeat repeatedly, or how do you say in English, what you repeat showing in movies and television about National Socialism, because we already get a little bit, sometimes we get a little bit even over flooded with always the same images of bad people in brown uniforms, swastika flags. And I didn't want to use the same imagery for that movie. I didn't want to repeat showing some stereotypes that have been shown so many times in movies to us, to grown-ups as well as to children, that they don't do anything with you anymore. And I tried to find a melancholy, a sadness, and maybe even a threat and a danger that is more subtle and that is more frightening. I think the most frightening thing for a small child can be when the parents leave and say, we go to another country, and you know that they are in danger and might not ever come back, you know. And the scene in the Swiss village when the parents go on the Kutsche, on the carriage, I think. Carriage, and Anna, in the last minute, she says, but be sure you come back, right? You come back, don't forget us here. And when how the mother screams, are you crazy? I would never forget my children. I think these are the moments that move me in the story, and I didn't want to show images that don't move me anymore because they have been shown too many times.
Mm-hmm. I feel also the loss of Heimpi is such an important moment, right? Like, I mean, it's gradual until Anna realizes when the handkerchief loses its smell. I think, oh, she says, oh, now this is gone too. And Heimpi is, of course, in a way like a grandmother character. She's sort of part of the family, but then she gets, unfortunately for the children and for the other members of the family, left behind. And I feel like I noticed that in several of your films, you have this sort of character on the periphery of the nuclear family that is very important to your storytelling, that is very important to the children in your stories. And I mean, for example, the two grandmothers for the Happe Kerkeling character. We have the aunt in Beyond Silence. We have Okur in Nowhere in Africa. And I'm just wondering, like, your idea of family and family constellations, which happen in all your films, and your thought thought about the, shall we say, patchwork family or the bigger nuclear family and the importance of these additional characters, if you could address that some more in terms of how you create your screenplays and your films.
Yeah, like I think when you say it that way, and I think about it, it's probably that I always try to personalize um, an abstract how do you say, eine Größe, an abstract element of a story. Like, for example, Heimpi is not only Heimpi. In the novel, Heimpi is not very important. But in my movie, I made her important because Heimpi stands for me, for all the friends and family and all the dear people that you leave behind. And Ovur in Nowhere in Africa, in a way, stands for Africa. You know, he's the cook in that family. He's the person who brings the language, the food, the smells, the habits of Africa into the everyday life of that German foreign family. And he becomes the closest friend. So I always try to find things, objects, props and also people that stand for much more than they are actually as one person. So yeah, Heimpi, I think, is everything you leave behind. Like Judith Kerr, in a way, did with her title, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. Pink Rabbit stands for your childhood, for Anna's childhood. Hitler stole my childhood. He stole the innocence. He stole not only my toys, he stole my home. And I think this is where Judith Kerr and I think very similarly, that emotion and also the message that you want to bring across often has to do with details. You know, it's not so much the big lesson you teach, but it's the detail, how sad it is to leave a little pink rabbit behind, and how sad it is to leave Heimpi, of course, behind. And it stands for much more than what that really only is, you know.
I thought it was also so interesting when you think of the word or the name Heimpi, right? The Heimat is already in that name, Heim. Like, I thought that was a wonderful little twist, and it's in the novel like that. But, you know, I mean, of course, the novel has different names for everybody. And I wonder in how far Judith Kerr might have changed the name of the housekeeper to bring in perhaps just a slight association of the word Heimat with that name. But that's mere conjecture on my part.
Definitely, she changed the names. That I know. Yeah, and she doesn't call herself Judith in the story, but Anna. So yeah, Frau Heimpel, Frau Heimperl heißt sie wohl, is her name, and they call her Heimpi. Yeah, that's probably not the real name of a housekeeper that they might not even have had. I don't know.
Yeah. And when we think of a film, it's a little bit of a switch of gears right now, but perhaps we'll do it with Ursula Werner, who is, of course, a tremendous actress, and you've worked with her before as part of the All About Me film. And I'm just wondering, films are tremendous team effort, and you, as a filmmaker, you have to build a team for every single movie. Sometimes you go back to like proven collaborators, and I think you do a mixture. Sometimes you work with people with whom you've worked before, like the music with Niki Reiser, or the editing with Patricia Rommel or Bella Halden, and then you have some actors you work with several times, like Juliane Köhler or Ursula Werner or Matthias Habich. And how did you decide? How did you decide on your team for Pink Rabbit? How did you bring together the actors and the crew to create an atmosphere of trust? And I think that's probably especially important for working with children, to make sure that they feel really comfortable. How do you create the team spirit for your crew and actors?
I think with the crew, it's completely different from working with the actors. But with the actors, I always really only think what is right for the story. In Ursula Werner's case, I must say, I made Heimpi a little bit older than she is probably in the book, because Heimpi, Ursula Werner, I wanted her so much in that movie too, because I had such a wonderful collaboration with her in the movie before that I made, and she was so important in that story. And she has that wonderful mixture of warmth and also intelligence and all this. So I wanted her for Heimpi, but usually I only think of what is right for the story, and I have some friends who are actors, and I tell them I only cast you for the part if that is right, and not just because we are good friends. You know, you have to be convinced that everything that happens in front of the camera is the right thing to do. With my team, my crew, I have people I worked with since the first movie I made, so that is different. There I appreciate a lot that we know each other so well, and that we know what we like and don't like, and that there is a mutual understanding sometimes without words.
And was it difficult? And I'll just, this is a quick follow-up, then I have one more question, then we open up to the Q&A. Was it difficult to work with a different sort of composer? I think you usually work with Niki Reiser, and for this film you worked with Hauschka. Was that an adjustment for you?
It is a different, new situation, and sometimes that brings out something new and inspirational. And Nikki worked on another movie. That's why he didn't have the time. So I enjoyed making a new experience with Volker, and he made wonderful movies and wonderful soundtracks. So no, it wasn't such a big, that wasn't so difficult. But Nikki belongs to my inner circle. So the next movie we will do together. But the work with Hauschka, with Volker Bertelmann, was very nice as well.
And one more question from me, and to the audience, if you haven't done so already, please submit your questions in the Q&A in writing. And my last question right now is, if you could go back to writing or making the movie, is there anything from today's perspective that you would change?
I don't know. No, I don't want to say that the movie is flawless, of course not. But once a movie is done, I think you, as a filmmaker or a director, you know, years later if something is there that you should have done differently. Once the movie is done, it's like your baby, you know. It is the way it is, and even if it has little things that are not perfect, you just accept it the way it is, I think. And when I look at my movies that are a few years old, then sometimes I see, oh my God, that is much too long, too slow, or whatever. Why didn't I tell the actor to do this, or why did I do this with the camera, or whatever. But no, Pink Rabbit is still too young. I have nothing to criticize at the moment, because I see Riva, I see the difficulties on the set sometimes that we had, the challenges, the problems, and you know, I can't really see it clearly. I see it very, very, very still in the emotion of the process.
Mm-hmm. So here's my first audience question. What challenges are you faced with when searching for child actors and actresses for your protagonist characters? Are there signs that tell you this person will be a good fit for the role and ready to face such a big challenge?
It has a lot to do with intuition. It has a lot to do with looking into the eyes of a child and seeing who is standing there in front of me. And then it is also praying and hoping that your intuition isn't wrong. With Riva, for example, she came into the room. She never did anything before. She never filmed anything before, which is a good thing, because I really, really always try to find children that never did anything before, because they have an innocence that is very hard to get once they have a lot of experience. And Riva walked into the room, and the first thing she said was, I went to the same school like Judith Kerr when she was a little girl, and that makes me perfect for the part. And she told me about how she sees the story. She knew the book, and she talked to me, and I looked at my casting director, and we both said, oh, please let her be a little bit talented, because the way she talks, the way she looks, the way she comes into that room is already perfect. And then she did 2 scenes, and we knew she can do it. She's strong, she's intelligent, she's emotional, and she's Jewish, so she knows what she's talking about. You know, she, even though her family didn't talk a lot with her about the Holocaust, she knows a lot about it anyway, and the story means something to her.
Great. And here is a question from a film person. She says, greetings, Juliane and Caroline. I just spoke with Carla Yuri in Iceland. The actual rabbit toy in the film looks perfect. Is it a Steiff? Did you discuss the looks of it with Judith Kerr?
We know this is maybe a little bit a mistake because Steiff like this, a rabbit like this didn't exist in 1933. And we painted it pink, as maybe you saw. And it is the toy that Judith Kerr had was much older in a way that, yeah, it looked different, but we couldn't find a toy from the 30s that wasn't completely, how do you say, zerrupft, ragged, you know, and so we
Yeah.
used that rabbit, and maybe it was a little bit too big, and the pink was not 100% perfect for the time. I am not even sure if Judith Kerr remembers it right that her rabbit was pink, because we couldn't find many toys from that time that were really pink. So the rabbit was a huge discussion, and it took us forever to make a decision which rabbit to take.
Here is a question regarding how the film production came about in Germany. And the question is, bearing in mind that Judith Kerr spent the majority of her life in England, why do you believe that Judith preferred the film to be produced and directed by you and for it to be filmed in German?
Because she spoke German with her parents when she was a little girl, and because Germany is the country where the story starts. And yeah, it was important to her. I know that. I never asked her why, but she always felt it is a German story and it needs to be, even though she wrote the book in English, right? English became her language. She wrote all her books in English, but still she wanted that to be a German movie. And she had to wait for a long time. The screenplay, or one version of the screenplay was around for years. And she became very impatient. And she always said, when is this going to happen? And until I got it on my table, it was much later. And then yeah, I was very, very sad that it took us so long to make the movie, because I wanted to show it to her, and unfortunately because of a few weeks we were not able to show it to her anymore, because unfortunately she passed away shortly before the film was done.
And could you recall any highlights from your phone conversations with Judith? Another viewer wants to know.
No, she was just a very, very sweet and sweet woman. She spoke in a very soft voice, very calm, very polite, very British in a way, but she was very, very tough in her opinions. For example, every change I did to the story was extremely well examined, and she was very skeptical about every change. So when I said when I talked with her about the calendar, when I talked with her about the father being a little bit vain sometimes, you know, he didn't want to accept presents from other people, and she was very skeptical if she likes that. And so we talked a lot about the changes. And but it was funny because she was such a warm and sweet and friendly and polite person. At the same time, she was very tough in her, no, I don't think so, no. But she was wonderful. She was a very, very kind lady.
Here is a question from an NYU colleague. He says, Juliane asked a complicated question about the role of identity in complicated historical context. Can you say something about being a German filmmaker making a film about a book written by a Jewish survivor? There are charged debates about identity and various sensitivities everywhere, so any insights would be appreciated.
You mean talking about the identity of Judith Kerr? How?
No. Sorry. I think what he means is the question as a German filmmaker. You make a book about a Jewish survivor, and how do you negotiate that different perspective and your own identity as a German filmmaker, dealing with the material that a Jewish survivor wrote. I think that's what the question means.
Yeah, I think, oh my God, what is this? Sorry. I think, first of all, Judith Kerr was a German little girl, and she didn't even know that she was Jewish. And that's why I think maybe Judith Kerr wanted that story to be told from a German's perspective. Also, Alfred Kerr, the father of Judith Kerr, was a very famous and very critical theater critic and literature critic here in Germany. He was very well, how do you say, he was very respected, at the same time very feared for his language, and the language German meant so much to him. That's why he was so humiliated, felt so humiliated and depressed that he had to live in a country where he isn't a master of the language that is spoken. So I think what I saw when I read the book for the first time, and also as a grown-up, of course, this is a German family. And I think what Alfred Kerr said about his being Jewish was very interesting for me. And I put it into the movie, even though it was never in the book from Judith Kerr, but I found it in Alfred Kerr's biography, was that the Nazis turned him into a Jew because he considered himself a German. And when he was in exile, like many other Jewish people, when they went to exile, all of a sudden, since the German took his citizenship away and he was not a German anymore with a passport, he, how do you say, he felt his identity was being Jewish. And he says in the movie, it was a comforting thought of being a part of that people, of that Fabelvolk, he says in German, of that people who are living all over.
Mythical people.
Yeah. So his identity, who am I and what makes me me, changes during the journey. And Anna's and Judith's understanding of who am I, what makes me me, what makes me the person I am changes. And I can look onto that process as a human being, I think, and I can see the transformation they make because they're forced to. And I think that is a very complex and very interesting story for a German filmmaker to talk about. I can try to understand what that did, the journey and the persecution and the fleeing, what it did to them and what it did to their feeling of their own identity. Mm-hmm. So that's why shouldn't I try to talk about it as a German? Why not?
And you already negotiated these questions when you did Nowhere in Africa to a certain degree, right?
Yeah. I think Stefanie Zweig never felt anything else than being German. She didn't feel British. She certainly didn't feel African, and the parents didn't. The mother of Stefanie Zweig didn't want to leave Kenya anymore, but I think the father and the daughter always wanted to go back in a way, or at least the father wanted to go back to Germany. But Judith Kerr became really British, I think. She really became British, and she took over the British citizenship, and she wanted to be in Britain. For her, she was not German anymore.
Mm-hmm. We have a question about your current project, and I think the last I heard you're working on a TV series about a child therapist. What's the progress on that? But are you already shooting that?
No, we're starting to shoot in August, and it's a series about two therapists that work with children. Yes, childhood seems to be my topic. I always like to work with children in difficult situations, in challenging situations, from Beyond Silence until what I'm doing next. It's always the children that, in a way, they move me. I just love children.
Mm-hmm. Did you watch the previous adaptation that came out in the 70s, the Pink Rabbit? And what were your thoughts on that? And did you discuss that with Judith Kerr?
Yeah, when she was critical with my changes, I talked with her about her TV adaptation from the 70s. And her husband, Mr. Neil, wrote the screenplay. And for me, that was the proof that you cannot take a novel and turn it one-to-one into a filmed piece of work, because it doesn't work. And for me, that TV, it was 2 times, I think 90 minutes, right, was problematic. It didn't really work because it was not focused on details. And what is so strong about the novel is that it has wonderful seconds and moments and quotations and remarks from the children. And in the 2 times 90 minutes, it was a little bit going, like this. It didn't have, how do you say in English? It didn't pull you into the story. yeah, I thought it was a little bit stiff.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember seeing it and I was not too impressed, but of course this is like 40 years ago, so my memories might be flawed, but I think I liked your movie much better. Um,
Thank you very much.
of course, it's the truth. And here is a question that we already partially touched on in our discussion when we discussed the refugee question. And this person is asking, to this day, German students still read When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit in their German classes and have even watched your film as part of class. What do you hope students learn from the novel and the film?
I mean, what I always try to talk with children about, young people about, my daughter about, is switch your perspective once in a while. Yeah, see the world from other standpoints. Try to understand what it feels like to be in somebody else's shoes, you know. And I think it's so easy. Anna is such a sweet and warm and wonderful little girl. It's so easy to step in her shoes and see what the world looks like from her perspective. And no matter whether these are children or grown-ups, it helps a lot if you sometimes just change your perspective and see, okay, imagine if I were in this situation. It can also be on the supermarket, in the line of a supermarket, you know, to change your own standpoint is sometimes very helpful. And we have so many clashes of opinions and standpoints, and in Germany and all over the world, in America as well, at the moment, and people don't really talk with each other anymore, and they don't even try to understand what life feels like in other people's shoes. So I can only encourage people, and it's not only about anti-Semitism or refugees, it's about everyday life, that this world would be so much nicer if we sometimes could step a little bit outside of our own desires and wants and beliefs and try to see the world from another perspective.
And of course, movies are one of the best tools to do that, right? Like when we watch a
Yes.
movie, we travel into the screen, we travel into other people's minds. And the best way to do it, of course, is at a movie theater, to sit in the dark and share that journey with other people. And as we're coming to a close, I want to recommend to everybody who can see this movie at a real movie theater, starting on May 21st, and put yourself in the shoes of Anna Kemper and her family and see the world through her eyes, and experience this absolutely excellent story that Caroline told in such beautiful images and with such great actors, and made happen with a absolutely terrific team. And Caroline, thank you so much again for being here. I know it's a very busy day for you, and I hope all the troubles of today will resolve soon. And thanks to the audience for being here and for staying through our technical glitch. And thank you, Dirk Schulz, for the warm welcome. And we will record this event, so it will be available. In fact, we are recording this event, so it will be edited and then made available. And let me also briefly mention pinkrabbitmovie.com, the website, so you will find more information about the film and where it's screening and everything on that website. And Caroline, is there anything you want to say before we say goodbye to audiences everywhere that are watching us?
No, I'm just glad that this movie travels, and that after the pandemic now, some other people all over the world, or at least now in New York, in America, have the chance to see the movie. And we put a lot of love and effort in the story, and I hope you enjoy it when you see it.
And I'm sure everybody will. Thank you so much, Caroline. Go watch the film, everyone. Go see any film at a movie theater if you can. It's the best experience. And have a nice afternoon, evening, or morning. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Caroline.